There is no baby. There is only your plan to get your hands on my son's 8 million. I was 10 weeks pregnant, standing on a private winery balcony in Napa County, California, when my mother-in-law decided I was a con artist. I had spent the entire week rehearsing a soft, happy little sentence. "We're having a baby." I never got to say it the way I meant to, because the second my husband shared the news, Lenora Caldwell looked at me like I was a stain on her tablecloth and said those words so loudly that 30 people heard them. Then, in less than a minute, she put me in an ambulance. And 6 months later, the one thing she thought would save her was the very thing that destroyed her. Welcome back to Calm Revenge Stories. If you've ever had someone decide who you are before you ever got the chance to speak, you're in the right place. Subscribe if you want more quiet stories about betrayal, proof, and the moment the truth stops whispering. Before that balcony, before the bruises, before my husband showed me exactly who he was, I was the kind of woman people called dependable when they wanted to sound nice and rigid when they wanted to be cruel. My name is Elena Torres. I was 32 years old. I lived in Sacramento, California, in a pale yellow bungalow with a narrow front garden and a fence I painted myself one summer because hiring someone felt like admitting defeat. I was a physical therapist at a rehabilitation clinic downtown. Most of my patients were recovering from surgeries, falls, strokes, wrecks. My days were measured in pain scales, progress notes, resistance bands, and tiny victories. A man lifting his own arm again. A grandmother making it 10 steps farther than yesterday. A teenager relearning balance after a motorcycle crash. Rehab teaches you patience and documentation. You write down everything. Pain level before, pain level after, range of motion, time, response, witnesses, setbacks, progress. I did not know then that this habit would become the reason I survived what that family tried to do to me. I met Daniel Caldwell at a charity auction for a children's rehab foundation. I had only gone because my clinic director guilted the staff into buying tickets, and I spent the first half of the evening standing near the dessert table wondering how quickly I could leave without seeming rude. Daniel walked over, asked me whether the miniature lemon tarts were worth the price of admission, and made me laugh hard enough that I stayed. He was handsome in an easy way. Navy suit, loosened tie, nice smile, expensive watch he acted like he forgot he was wearing. He ran a boutique commercial design firm in San Francisco. He remembered details. He called when he said he would. He sent soup to my house when I had the flu in our first year dating. He listened with his whole face, or maybe I only thought he did. We got married 3 years later at a botanical garden in Sonoma. Small ceremony, white chairs on the lawn. My younger sister Isabel fixing my veil with trembling hands because she cries at everything. I kept my last name. Daniel said he didn't care. He said he loved that I was my own person. At the time, I believed him. The Caldwells had money in the old polished way, not flashy, not loud. The kind that sits in trusts and foundations and properties with names instead of addresses. Daniel's mother, Lenora Caldwell, controlled most of it. His father, Stephen, liked to talk as though he had final authority. But even I could tell after 2 family dinners that Lenora was the center of gravity, and everyone else was furniture orbiting her. There was a family trust worth around $8 million. That was the number everyone danced around, and everyone obeyed. Lenora administered distributions. Daniel's firm had been helped more than once by temporary family support, which was a polished phrase for money with strings attached. His older sister, Vanessa, was 35 and forever between ventures. Stephen had opinions and cufflinks and very little practical power. Before the wedding, they had me sign a prenuptial agreement. I signed it without blinking. The family trust remained Caldwell property. Any inheritance remained separate. Any premarital assets stayed with the original owner. Fine, wonderful. I had no interest in their money. I had my salary, my bungalow, my retirement account, and the kind of pride that comes from knowing exactly what your own labor has paid for. Lenora still watched me like I was a woman casing a jewelry store. She was 61, silver blonde, immaculate, and so controlled it felt theatrical. At dinners, she sat at the head of the table even when the meal was at someone else's house. She never raised her voice when a lower one would cut better. She called me dear the way some people say stray. The first year of my marriage, I told myself she just needed time. The second year, I understood she had already made a decision about me. Then I got pregnant and suspicion became something active. I found out on a Thursday morning in the employee restroom at work after 2 days of feeling vaguely carsick and blaming stress. I stared at the test until the lines blurred. Then I sat on the closed toilet lid and cried into a wad of scratchy brown paper towels because happiness sometimes arrives looking exactly like fear. At 10 weeks, I had my first proper scan. The sonographer dimmed the lights and turned the monitor toward me. There was my baby, tiny and bright and real, a little shape flickering on a black field. The heartbeat was fast and certain. I laughed and cried at the same time. The technician smiled like she'd seen this 1,000 times and still liked it every single time. She printed out a thermal image for me, grainy black and white, my name at the top, date, measurements, proof that this small impossible thing existed outside my own hope. I slipped it into the inner compartment of my handbag, the zipped one where I keep the things I cannot lose. That night, Daniel cried when I showed him. Real tears, wet cheeks, both hands over his mouth. He knelt in front of me in our kitchen while I sat on the counter, and he pressed his forehead to my stomach as if he could greet someone through skin. I remember thinking, this is the beginning of the rest of my life. We decided to announce it that Sunday at Lenora's anniversary luncheon. Not a birthday this time. Their 38th wedding anniversary, a polished private afternoon at an estate winery outside St. Helena. Long farmhouse table catered meal. Family and a few close business friends. Daniel said his mother loved family milestones. He said good news would soften her. I wanted that to be true. The only warning came from Vanessa. 2 days before the luncheon, I ran into her outside a gourmet market in Yountville while I was buying fruit and crackers for a patient education event. I mentioned we had something special to share at Sunday lunch. She froze for half a second, then smiled without warmth and said, "You really do have a talent for timing, don't you?" It was such a strange sentence that I replayed it all the way home. I considered asking Daniel about it. Then I told myself I was being hormonal and oversensitive and making meaning where none existed. Women are trained to do that to ourselves, to smooth over the sharp edge before we even test whether it can cut. The winery sat on a rise overlooking rows of vines gone gold-green in the late afternoon sun. The private terrace behind the event room had iron lanterns, stone flooring, and a low stucco ledge along the far side. Beyond that ledge was a lower-tasting patio with gravel, planters, and a decorative olive tree. It was not a sheer drop, maybe 9 feet at most. 9 feet is enough. I noticed it the second we arrived because I notice hazards automatically. Uneven step, slick tile, low wall. That is what rehab work does to your brain. It makes you catalog risk. There were 28 guests that day. Daniel's parents, Vanessa, two of Stephen's old law partners, Lenora's cousin Miriam, several family friends, one local councilman and his wife. My friend Priya Nair came as my guest because she had covered for me during my appointment week and because I trusted her. Priya was an occupational therapist at my clinic and the most observant person I knew. Lenora greeted me near the entry with a kiss to the air beside my cheek. "Elena," she said, as though she was pleasantly surprised I had arrived at an event I had already RSVP'd to. I handed her a wrapped bottle of single estate olive oil from a farm she once claimed to admire. She passed it to a server without looking at it. Across the room, I saw Lenora and Vanessa near the bar, heads close together, fast whispers. They stopped the second I looked over. Priya saw it too. "They were definitely discussing you," she murmured. I smiled too quickly and said, "You don't know that." But I did know that. I had known it in 100 little moments before that day. The stopped conversation, the appraising glance, the smile that arrived a fraction too late. Daniel came over with sparkling water for me and white wine for himself. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "After the toast, my heart jumped." I touched my bag where the scan rested inside its zipped pocket. I had imagined this moment all week, the smiles, the surprise. Maybe even Lenora softening for once, if only because a grandchild would make me useful in a way she could not deny. That is the thing about hope. It keeps volunteering long after it should resign. Lunch stretched into speeches. Stephen made a self-congratulatory toast about marriage and endurance. Everyone laughed at the right places. Plates were cleared. Dessert was served. The sun angled lower over the vines. At around 3:30, Daniel stood with his champagne flute and tapped a spoon against it. "We have some happy news," he said, smiling at me with tears already brightening his eyes. "Elena and I are expecting a baby." For one clean, shining second, the world held. Miriam gasped. Someone clapped. Priya grabbed my arm in excitement. Then I heard the crystal click of Lenora setting down her glass. It sliced through the terrace. She looked at Daniel, then at me, and she said, "There is no baby. There is only your plan to get your hands on my son's 8 million." Silence. Not soft silence. Not confused silence. The awful kind. Heavy, public. The kind that makes every face around you suddenly interesting because no one knows whether to stare or pretend they are not staring. I actually laughed once, a short, involuntary sound. Not because it was funny, because my brain rejected it as real. Daniel said, "Mother, what are you doing? Too weak, too late." Lenora rose from her chair with perfect calm. She did not look hysterical. She looked certain. That was what made it so frightening. She turned slightly toward the guests, as if inviting them into a reasonable discussion. "My son is attached to a trust worth $8 million, she said. "And now, out of nowhere, there is a pregnancy no one has seen proof of. I am not stupid." I felt heat shoot through my body. "Then cold," I said carefully. "I'm 10 weeks along, we have a scan." Lenora's expression sharpened. "Of course you do," she said. "A slip of paper can be manufactured." Priya stepped closer to me. I could feel her beside my shoulder. Stephen said, "Lenora, enough." He said it the way a man says something ritualistic, meaningless from overuse. Vanessa folded her arms and looked interested, not shocked. That was when something in me shifted because she was not surprised. She was watching a script reach its next page. I should have pulled out the image right then. I didn't. Part of me still believed that dignity mattered with people like this. That if I refused to perform on command, the ugliness would reveal itself. I thought adults in a room full of witnesses would see reason. Instead, Lenora walked toward me, slowly, deliberately. "You have been circling this family since the day Daniel brought you in," she said in a low, controlled voice. Quiet, careful, so very prepared. "Women like you think if you look modest enough, no one notices what you are after." My back touched the stucco ledge. I had not even realized I had given ground. I said, "I am not doing this in front of your guests." "Then prove me wrong," she replied. "Show them." I felt the ledge against the backs of my thighs. Priya was moving around the table toward us, but too many people stood frozen in place, suspended by discomfort and curiosity. Daniel stood there. That is a fact I still cannot tell without feeling a hollow place open in my chest. He stood there between us and did nothing. I looked Lenora in the eye and said the steadiest thing I could manage. "There is a heartbeat. You can insult me if you like, but you do not get to erase my child because you dislike me." Her face changed then. Not much. Just enough. Her mouth flattened, her jaw set. "Then show me," she said. She reached for my handbag. To this day I believe that was her first intention, to snatch the scan, to inspect it, to call it fake in front of everyone, to physically control the evidence the way she controlled every other narrative in that family. But control and force are close cousins. When I pulled the bag toward me, she shoved me, both hands. Hard. The low ledge caught behind my legs. The sky tipped. Priya screamed my name. Then I was over. I did not fall off a cliff or from a tower. I fell backward from the upper terrace to the lower tasting patio below, about 9 feet. That is enough to break things. I landed on my left side first. My hip struck gravel and stone. My right wrist bent underneath me with a crack so sharp I heard it before I felt it. Then my shoulder and ribs hit the edge of a planter. The breath left my body in a violent, empty rush. For a second I could not inhale, and in that horrible suspended moment my only coherent thought was the baby. Not myself, not Lenora, not the guests above. The baby. Voices erupted overhead. A chair scraped. Someone shouted to call emergency services. Daniel appeared at the edge of the upper terrace and then vanished from sight, running for the stairs. Priya reached me first. She came down so fast she nearly fell herself. She dropped beside me on the gravel and went straight into clinical mode. "Elena, stay still. Talk to me. Where is the pain? Are you bleeding?" I could barely form words. "My wrist," I gasped. "My side. The baby." Daniel came next, pale and shaking and uselessly saying my name over and over. Priya ignored him and checked my pulse at my neck. She looked at my abdomen, my face, my breathing. My handbag had spilled beside the planter, half open. The scan, I whispered. Inside pocket. Priya did not ask why. She reached in, found the folded thermal print, and held it up where I could see it with dirt smudged along one corner. Got it, she said. It's here. The ambulance ride to Queen of the Valley Medical Center in Napa felt both instant and endless. I know enough medicine to know when people are worried, but trying not to show it. The paramedic kept asking whether I had cramps, bleeding, dizziness, abdominal pain. I answered as calmly as I could while my wrist throbbed in bright white pulses and my whole torso felt as if someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. At the hospital, they moved quickly. Blood pressure, IV, fetal assessment, imaging, questions. There is a distinct terror in being a patient when you work adjacent to medicine because every delay means something and every expression means more. My wrist was fractured, distal radius, clean enough to set without surgery. Thank God. But bad enough for a cast from hand to below elbow. I had bruised ribs on my right side and heavy contusions across my hip and shoulder. More frightening, I had abdominal tenderness and light spotting by the time they monitored me. I remember lying under harsh lights, cast still damp, praying with a desperation so pure it almost felt like bargaining. Then the obstetric resident angled the Doppler and we heard it. Fast, strong, defiant. A tiny racing heartbeat filling a room that had been holding its breath. I cried so hard I shook. The resident told me there was a small subchorionic bleed and I would need observation, pelvic rest, and follow-up monitoring. But the baby was alive and measuring appropriately. Those words lodged in me like rescue, alive, measuring appropriately, right on time. Daniel stood in the corner, holding the dirty sonogram print in both hands, like a child with a church relic. He was crying too, looking at me, looking at his phone, looking at me, looking at his phone. Even then, I noticed it. Who keeps reaching for their phone while their pregnant wife is in a hospital bed after being pushed from a balcony? A man still tethered somewhere else. At around 12:30 that night, I heard his voice in the hallway. The hospital door was not fully shut. I was supposed to be resting, but people who live around treatment rooms know how to listen through walls. He was speaking low, urgent, frayed. She fell over the ledge. A pause. I know what it looked like. Another pause. No, I'm saying it happened fast. Maybe she stumbled when Mom grabbed the bag. Maybe. That word entered me like ice. Maybe. Not my mother shoved my wife. Not I saw what happened. Maybe she stumbled. Maybe she leaned wrong. Maybe it was confusion. 3 or 4 softening words and already the truth was being sanded down in the hallway while I lay there with a cast on my arm and bruises beginning to bloom. When he came back in, I asked, "Who were you talking to?" "Vanessa," he said too quickly. "Everyone's worried." I looked at him. "Your mother pushed me?" He shut his eyes for half a second. "Elena, it was chaos." That was the first clean crack in my marriage, not because he screamed at me, not because he called me a liar, because he reached for ambiguity when clarity would have cost him something. I did not argue. I did what I always do when something matters. I documented. In the bathroom mirror, clumsy with my left hand, I lifted the hospital gown and photographed every mark I could see. Purple pressure bruises high on both shoulders, a scrape along my lower back, gravel embedded in skin near my hip, my cast, the hospital wristband, time-stamped, ugly, real. The next morning, I requested copies of my intake notes and discharge records. The nurse did not blink. She had probably seen enough families to understand that calm women who ask for paper usually have a reason. I stayed under observation for 2 days. On the second evening, Lenora still had not called me. Not once. Vanessa sent one text. "We all need to be careful how this is described. How this is described." I stared at that sentence until my vision blurred. Daniel drove me home to Sacramento after discharge. He was attentive in all the visible ways. He bought my prescriptions, adjusted the passenger seat, helped me up our front steps, heated soup, but there was something guest-like about him, hesitant, dislocated, like he had not decided where he belonged. The answer arrived the next afternoon. His family came to my house. Not Lenora, she was too smart for that. Stephen came. Vanessa came. Daniel sat on my own couch looking like he wished he could disappear into the upholstery. My living room smelled faintly like eucalyptus cleaner and chicken broth. Sunlight fell across the rug I bought after saving for months. And there they were, occupying the furniture I paid for, preparing to tell me what had happened to my own body. Vanessa did most of the talking. She sat upright with her ankles crossed and said, "We're trying to find a version of events that protects everyone." I remember looking at her and feeling something inside me become very still. "What version is that?" I asked. She folded her hands. "The one where this was a misunderstanding. You became emotional. Mother reached for your purse. You lost your footing." I said nothing. She continued, gaining confidence in the silence. "No one wants a spectacle, Elena, particularly not now with your condition. If this becomes some dramatic allegation, people will ask ugly questions about your motives, about whether this pregnancy was timed to create leverage, about your state of mind. There it was, not just denial. Preloaded character assassination." I sat with my cast in my lap and asked, "Are you saying I threw myself off a terrace while pregnant?" Stephen cleared his throat but did not answer. Vanessa gave the sort of expression people wear when they want to sound compassionate while saying something vile. "I think stress can make people behave unpredictably." I looked at Daniel, he looked at the floor. That hurt more than Vanessa speaking. I asked one question: if I lost my footing, how did bruises shaped like hands appear on both my shoulders? No one answered. Vanessa stood, smoothed her blouse, and said, "We are trying to help you." Then she set a business card for Lenore's attorney on my coffee table. My coffee table. I waited until I heard all three car doors shut outside. Then I locked the front door and called Priya. She arrived an hour later with Thai takeout, a legal pad, and a face that told me she was already furious on my behalf. I cried for exactly 7 minutes. Then I stopped. Not because I was healed, because something had changed shape. Fear was still there, grief too, but underneath them was a cold, practical line of thought I recognized from hard rehab cases. You do not wish your way through damage. You assess, plan, proceed. Priya spread the legal pad open on my dining table. "Good," she said. "Now we build." We made a list. Hospital records, photographs of injuries, the sonogram print, discharge instructions requiring observation after abdominal trauma, Vanessa's text, call logs, witnesses. Then Priya said the sentence that changed everything. "There had to be cameras." I stared at her. "It was a private event venue," she said. "A winery with expensive clients, alcohol service, and legal exposure. They absolutely have surveillance on entry points and terraces." I felt my pulse in my throat. Of course they did. That same evening, I called the winery's events office and asked, politely and very calmly, whether surveillance covered the private terrace where the anniversary luncheon had been held. The events manager became cagey immediately. Liability procedure, ownership, legal request. Fine. I called an attorney the next morning. Not Lenora's attorney. Mine. Her name was Marisol Vega, and she specialized in personal injury and civil litigation with enough family wealth messes in her background to recognize one by smell. She was based in Davis, razor sharp and impossible to rattle. I arrived at her office in a sling and a cast with a folder, a phone full of photos, and the sonogram print in a plastic sleeve. She listened without interrupting. That alone nearly made me cry. When I finished, she said they already know whether the footage exists, which means their urgency tells me they are afraid of what it shows. She sent a preservation letter to the winery that afternoon requiring them to retain all surveillance from the property for the date of the event. She also sent notices regarding potential litigation and advised me not to discuss the incident with Daniel's family at all unless in writing. Daniel came by that weekend, supposedly to pick up files from his home office. He stood in my kitchen, hands in pockets, and looked as though he had practiced his speech in the car. "Elena," he said, "I love you. I love this baby. But I need you to think very carefully about how far you want to take this." I leaned against the counter because standing too long still hurt. "How far I want to take your mother pushing me off a terrace." He exhaled hard. "That language is exactly what I'm talking about." I stared at him. He rushed on. "If lawyers get involved, it becomes public. The firm gets dragged in, my parents get dragged in. There are press contacts because of my father's work. It won't stay private." I asked quietly, "What happens to you if I continue?" He did not answer. He didn't need to. I said it for him. Your mother cuts off your support. Your business line tightens. Existing projects get shaky. Investors start hearing family instability, and you finally have to find out whether you can survive without Caldwell money. His eyes filled. The worst part was that I believed he was genuinely afraid. Daniel was not a movie villain. He was weaker than that. Softer, more common. A man who loved comfort and had spent his whole life confusing dependence with loyalty. I'm asking for peace, he said. No, I replied. You're asking me to absorb what your mother did so you don't have to confront what it means. He sat down at the kitchen table and cried. Actual tears. Bent shoulders. Quiet shame. I felt almost nothing. I'm not asking you to choose me, I said. You already did. That was the beginning of the end. A week later, Marisol called. The winery had confirmed there were cameras covering the terrace entry, the bar area, and part of the ledge where the confrontation occurred. I sat so quickly on my sofa, I nearly missed the cushion. Do we have it? I asked. Not yet, she said. But they preserved it, and based on the tone of opposing counsel, your mother-in-law's side is trying to characterize this as an accidental loss of balance during a verbal disagreement. Of course they were. The first actual viewing happened at Marisol's office 3 weeks after the fall. By then my bruises had yellowed at the edges, my wrists still ached constantly, and I had developed the strange exhausted vigilance that comes from being pregnant and under stress at the same time. Marisol had a conference room monitor ready. She, her paralegal, and I sat at one side of the table. Across from us was Lenora's attorney, a gray man with a cultured voice and the expression of someone already tired of defending rich people's disasters. No Lenora. No Daniel. No Vanessa. The video quality was good enough to be terrible, no audio, but audio was unnecessary. There I was near the ledge. Lenora approaching guests turning, Daniel several feet away. Priya moving from the table. Lenora reached. I moved my handbag back toward my body, then her hands came forward to my shoulders, both of them clear as daylight, a hard shove. My body rocked backward over the ledge and disappeared from frame. Nobody in that room spoke for several seconds after the clip ended. Then Lenora's attorney removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose like a man whose week had just been ruined. He asked to view it again. We did, same thing. No stumble, no mutual tangle, no ambiguity. A shove. I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, I felt something stranger. A dull, clean grief. Because now there was nowhere left to hide. Not for them. Not for my marriage. Not for any version of this where I had misunderstood. Marisol was magnificent. She obtained a copy through discovery procedures and paired it with my medical records, photos, witness statements from Priya and 2 other guests, and Vanessa's text urging caution in how this is described. Priya's statement was precise and devastating. She had seen Lenora advancing, heard demands for proof, and watched both hands make contact. One of Stephen's law partners, apparently disgusted enough to risk the family's displeasure, confirmed that Lenora had accused me of faking the pregnancy for money immediately before the fall. Once the footage existed on paper and in legal context, the Caldwells' confidence changed. First came the settlement language. Quiet resolution, mutual misunderstanding, family privacy, non-disparagement, then came Daniel. He arrived one evening without warning, rain damp on his coat, carrying grocery bags as if normalcy could still be performed into existence. I made a mistake, he said before I even invited him in. I let him stand in the doorway. He looked wrecked, sleepless. Stubble, eyes swollen with someone else's consequences, finally reaching him. I should have protected you, he said. Yes, I answered. He winced. He told me his mother had panicked, that she had not meant for me to go over, that everyone was under pressure, that Vanessa had escalated things, that his father was trying to manage the fallout, that he was sorry, sorry, sorry. I listened. Then I asked, did you tell them to stop calling me a liar? He opened his mouth, closed it. That was enough. I filed for divorce in Placer County the following week. The prenup they had loved so much made things very simple. My house remained mine. My savings remained mine. There was no battle over trust assets, because I had never wanted them. No one could credibly paint me as a gold digger while I walked away from a marriage with exactly what I brought into it, and not a dollar more. That part drove Lenora mad, because women like her need motive. If I was not after money, then I had to be something worse in her mind, principled. The civil case moved faster than they expected because the video compressed the room for argument. Lenora's team shifted from denial to minimization. She did not shove, she reacted. She did not intend harm, she lost emotional control. It was a family dispute, it was regrettable, it was isolated. Marisol translated all of that into plain English for me. They know they cannot win on facts, she said. Now they want mercy priced as pragmatism. I did not scream. I did not give interviews. I did not post cryptic messages online. I went to my prenatal appointments. I did my modified work duties at the clinic when my doctor allowed it. I saved every document in labeled folders. I answered through counsel. I stayed boring. Boring is powerful when the other side expects chaos. Around 4 months after the fall, another piece arrived. A former event server from the winery contacted Marisol after hearing through local gossip that legal action was underway. She had not seen the shove itself because she was inside carrying dessert plates, but she had seen Vanessa and Lenora speaking near the service corridor before lunch began. According to her, Vanessa had said, if she pulls out some little picture, don't let her control the room. Not enough for a criminal conspiracy drama. More than enough to suggest the humiliation had not been spontaneous. When Marisol relayed that to me, I did not feel shocked. Only confirmed. I had known from the first frozen look near the bar that the scene had been prepared emotionally, if not in exact choreography. They had come armed with suspicion and humiliation. The push had turned it into violence. 6 months after the luncheon, I was visibly pregnant, divorced in all but final paperwork, and sitting in a civil deposition room in Sacramento while Lenora Caldwell finally had to answer questions under oath. She wore cream silk, pearls, perfect makeup. The same face she had worn at the winery, except now there was strain around the mouth. Marisol sat beside me with tabs and exhibits. A court reporter clicked steadily nearby. Lenora tried dignity first. She described herself as a concerned mother who had reason to question my sincerity. She spoke of family stress, emotional confusion, unfortunate physical dynamics. Then Marisol placed the still frame on the table. Not the whole video, just the image pulled from the clearest angle. Lenora's hands extended against my shoulders, my body already tipping backward, my bag clutched against me. A frozen moment of intention. Marisol slid it toward her. Can you identify yourself in this image, Mrs. Caldwell? Lenora looked at it for 3 long seconds. Yes. And are those your hands making contact with Miss Torres? A pause. Yes. Was Miss Torres moving toward you when you made contact? No. Did she threaten you physically? No. Did you accuse her in front of guests of fabricating her pregnancy for financial gain? Another pause. I questioned her motives. Marisol did not even blink. Did you say there was no baby? Lenora's jaw tightened. I may have said words to that effect. Court reporters are not supposed to react. This one did not, but I swear the room itself got colder. Then came the worst question, the one that mattered most to me. Were you aware at the time you made contact with Miss Torres that she was pregnant? Lenora looked up, straight at me for the first time all day. Yes. I will never forget that moment. Not because it was dramatic, because it was small. A single syllable. Yes. And with that, all the expensive language around us collapsed. The case resolved not long after. Confidential settlement on some terms, yes. I know channels like this often want a giant courtroom speech and handcuffs by sunset. Real life is quieter, but some outcomes matter more than spectacle. Lenora paid a substantial amount. More than enough to cover medical costs, therapy, lost wages, legal pressure, and the future she tried to destabilize. I cannot give every term, but I can say this. The sum was large enough that even her preferred friends in Napa heard whispers. Large enough that Daniel's firm, already wobbling from family fallout, lost a key project when the investors decided dysfunction around leadership was too risky. Large enough that the family's insistence on silence became its own advertisement. And because civil discovery had made the footage impossible to erase, certain social circles saw it anyway. Money buys privacy. It does not always buy respect back. Stephen retreated. Vanessa vanished into consulting in Seattle after one failed startup too many. Daniel rented a furnished apartment in San Francisco and sent exactly 3 heartfelt emails I never answered. Lenora stayed in her house, chaired fewer charity boards, and learned what it feels like when a room that used to adore you becomes careful. My son was born 2 months later in Sacramento on a foggy Wednesday morning after 14 ugly hours of labor and one epidural. I would have proposed marriage to if legally allowed. He had dark hair, serious eyes, a loud opinion about entering the world. When they placed him on my chest, every part of the past year rearranged itself around that moment. I named him Mateo. Not a Caldwell anything, just Mateo Torres. Priya was there. Isabel was there. My mother arrived halfway through active labor with a duffel bag and enough snacks to provision a small expedition. The room was full of people who loved me in ways that did not require proof. Months later, when Mateo was sleeping through exactly one generous 4-hour stretch each night, and I was beginning to resemble a person again, I opened the fireproof box where I now keep the important documents of my life: house deed, passport, divorce decree, settlement papers, and the image. Not the original sonogram. That one lives in Mateo's baby book now, smudged corner and all. I mean the still frame from the surveillance footage, the one Marisol printed for deposition, a grainy overhead image from a winery terrace, showing a well-dressed woman with both hands extended and another woman already falling backward out of the life she thought she had. I keep it because of what it taught me. Not that rich people lie, anyone can lie. Not that family can betray you, we already know that. What it taught me was simpler. When someone powerful is counting on confusion, your calm is not weakness. It is a weapon. Lenora thought the loudest moment of my life would define me. The accusation, the public humiliation, the fall. It did not, the paper did, the records, the photographs, the witness statements, the preserved footage she forgot existed because women like her only notice the eyes in the room, never the cameras on the wall. And Daniel, if you're wondering whether I ever regretted leaving him while pregnant, here is the honest answer. No, I grieved him. I grieved the man I thought he was. I grieved the life I had imagined. But regret belongs to choices wrongly made. Leaving was not one of them, because the day I needed a husband, he became a son. And the day his mother shoved me, the marriage was already over. The paperwork just took longer to catch up. Now Mateo is 2. He likes blueberries, toy trucks, and stacking wooden blocks higher than seems structurally wise. I still work in rehab 3 days a week. I still write everything down. My wrist aches when the weather changes. I take that as a reminder, not a punishment. Sometimes new patients look at the faint stiffness in my right hand and ask if I injured it playing sports. I usually smile and say, no, family accident. That is close enough for strangers, but you know the full version, the cruel quote, the balcony, the little printout in the zipper pocket, the husband who blinked when he should have stood up, the mother-in-law who thought certainty could replace truth, and the frame that caught her forever. If this story landed somewhere tender in you, subscribe to Calm Revenge Stories. We tell the quiet ones here, the ones where nobody has to shout for justice to arrive. Sometimes all it takes is one clear image.